The wind bit at Eliza's thin shawl, carrying the scent of dust and something stale and metallic, like old blood. Below the ridge, the cluster of rough men waited by their horses, shadows against the dying light. Beside Eliza, 5-year-old Mary whimpered, burying her face in Eliza's skirts, while 8-year-old Sarah stood rigid, eyes wide with a terror Eliza knew mirrored her own. Their stepmother, a woman whose cruelty was as vast and empty as the plains before them, had sealed the transaction moments ago, her voice sharp and devoid of feeling. Eliza had expected fear, grief, the cold knot of despair she'd lived with since Papa died, but not this particular flavor of dread. Sold, like chattel, and to these men, whose faces were obscured by shadow and wide-brimmed hats. The man nearest the front was taller than the others, broad-shouldered, his posture still and unreadable. He wore a long duster even in the mild evening air. He didn't join in the low, coarse laughter of his companions. He just watched, his gaze seemingly fixed on the small knot of them shivering on the ridge. "Go on now," the stepmother rasped, giving Eliza a shove. "They've paid. The agreement is struck." Eliza stumbled, pulling the girls with her. Their small hands clung to her desperately. Papa had taught them to be strong, resilient, but he hadn't envisioned this. He had filled their lives with stories of courage and kindness, a stark contrast to the reality his death had ushered in. The men below grew clearer as they descended the slope. Their faces were hard, weathered eyes assessing. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. She positioned herself slightly in front of her sisters, a flimsy shield against the unknown. The tall man stepped forward as they reached the bottom. Up close, he was even more imposing. His face was lean, shadowed, his eyes a deep, almost unreadable color under the brim of his hat. There was a stillness about him that set him apart, a quiet intensity that was unnerving. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a hand. He simply extended one large hand towards Mary, who recoiled behind Eliza. "The youngest," he said, his voice low and gravelly, surprisingly devoid of the expected roughness. It was neither kind nor cruel, simply a statement of fact. Eliza instinctively pulled Mary closer. "We stay together," the stepmother scoffed from the ridge. "Don't be foolish, girl. You're separated." That was the arrangement. The tall man's gaze shifted to Eliza, lingering for a moment. There was no judgment in his eyes, but no sympathy either. Just observation. He lowered his hand slowly. Then, without a word, he turned and spoke briefly to the other men in a dialect Eliza didn't understand. Their laughter died. They exchanged glances, some annoyed, others wary. The tall man turned back to Eliza. "Mount up," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unquestionable authority. He gestured to 3 horses, smaller than the others, already saddled. It wasn't the arrangement. Eliza knew it wasn't. The stepmother's face on the ridge was a mask of fury. The other men grumbled, but the tall man simply waited. He mounted his own horse, a powerful, dark animal, and looked back at them, his figure silhouetted against the last vestiges of twilight. Eliza, bewildered but sensing a strange, fragile opening, hoisted Mary onto the first horse, helped Sarah onto the second, and scrambled onto the third herself. They rode out as the first stars pricked the bruised sky, leaving the stepmother's enraged shouts fading behind them. The tall man rode point, silent, a mystery leading them into the deepening night. The scent of dust and uncertainty hung heavy in the air. Eliza clutched the reins, one arm around Mary, her eyes fixed on the broad, silent back of the man who had, inexplicably, kept them together. The journey was a test of endurance, a relentless push across stark landscapes that seemed determined to strip them bare. Day after day blurred into dust, sun, and the rhythmic, wearying sway of the horses. The tall cowboy, they heard one of the other men refer to him as Cole once, remained a figure of few words. He rode ahead, choosing the path, his movements efficient and economical. The other men, fewer now, having peeled off after the first day without ceremony or explanation, kept their distance, their glances speculative and unfriendly. Eliza learned to manage the horses, to keep her sisters steady in their saddles, to parcel out the meager rations provided by Cole. He didn't offer comfort, didn't explain where they were going or why the arrangement had changed. But his actions began to tell a different story than his stoic demeanor. He made sure their horses were watered first. He shared his own canteen when theirs ran low, offering it silently, watching with those deep, unreadable eyes as they drank. At night, he built the fire away from the others, creating a small, distinct space for them. He slept with his saddle as a pillow, his rifle close, always facing outwards, towards the darkness and the unknown. One night, a coyote's howl startled Mary awake, sending her into a fit of terrified sobbing. Eliza tried to soothe her, rocking her gently under the vast, indifferent stars. Cole simply rose, walked to the edge of their small camp, and stood there for a long moment, a silent, imposing guardian between them and the wild. The coyotes fell silent. He didn't return to his bedroll immediately, standing watch for a while longer before settling back down. Eliza watched him, a knot of confusion and cautious hope beginning to unravel the fear in her chest. This wasn't the protection she'd imagined, if she'd dared to imagine any at all. It was practical, silent, rooted in action rather than words. One afternoon, Mary, exhausted and restless, slipped from her saddle. Eliza cried out, pulling her horse to a halt. Before Eliza could dismount, Cole was there, dismounting fluidly, his long strides covering the distance in moments. He knelt by Mary, checking her quickly, his hands gentle but firm. He didn't speak to her in soft tones, but his presence was calm, reassuring. He helped her back onto the horse, adjusting the saddle, making sure she was secure. His fingers brushed Eliza's arm as he passed the reins back to her. The touch was brief, accidental perhaps, but it sent a jolt through her. It was the first physical contact that wasn't about handling the horses or supplies. His eyes met hers for a fleeting second. Something flickered there, something that might have been acknowledgement, perhaps even a shared weariness. "Ride closer," he said, his voice still low, rough around the edges. "Keep her between you and Sarah." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, quiet but absolute. Eliza nodded, her throat tight. As they rode on, she kept her younger sisters close, acutely aware of Cole riding ahead, his silent presence a strange comfort in the vast emptiness. She didn't understand this man. He was part of the terrible deal, yet he was acting against its apparent terms. He was hard, solitary, etched by the harshness of the land, but beneath that exterior, there were these quiet acts of unexpected care. Eliza's internal monologue was a constant debate. Was this a temporary reprieve? Was he leading them to something even worse? Or was he, against all logic, their protector? The landscape offered no answers, only endless horizons and the deepening bond of shared dependence. Eliza found herself watching his back, not just out of wariness, but with a nascent, complicated curiosity. The journey continued, each mile a slow turning of Eliza's understanding. The silence of Cole began to feel less like indifference and more like a deliberate form of communication. He spoke when necessary, his instructions clear and concise, how to tie down their gear more securely, how to spot a reliable water source, how to tend a horse's sore back. He didn't teach them with patience or gentle encouragement, but with direct demonstration, expecting them to observe and learn. And they did. Sarah, initially withdrawn, started asking him questions about the plants, the stars at night. Cole would answer briefly, his gaze fixed on the horizon, but he answered. Mary, the most fragile, began to toddle towards him in the evenings, sometimes leaning against his leg as he mended tack or sharpened a knife. He never pushed her away. He never explicitly welcomed her either, but the silent allowance was a form of acceptance. Eliza found herself studying him, not just his protective actions, but the man himself. His hands, roughened and capable, moved with a quiet competence. The lines etched around his eyes were deep, speaking of sun and wind and perhaps things seen that couldn't be unseen. There was a loneliness about him, a self-imposed solitude that mirrored the vastness of the land they traversed. One evening, huddled by the fire while her sisters slept, Eliza found the courage to ask, "Why did you keep us together?" The arrangement. He was cleaning his rifle, his movements smooth and focused. He paused, looking into the fire. Arrangements change, that was all. No grand pronouncement, no explanation of motives. Just that simple, clipped phrase. But the men, the stepmother, they expected. He finally looked at her, his eyes catching the firelight. There was something in them she hadn't seen before. Weariness, yes, but also a deep, unwavering resolve. They expected what they paid for. They didn't pay for this. He gestured vaguely towards her sleeping sisters, then back to Eliza. His gaze held hers, steady and open in a way it hadn't been before. "You and yours. You're not theirs." The words hung in the air, profound in their simplicity. They weren't theirs. They belonged to themselves. He had somehow claimed that for them. The fear didn't vanish entirely, but it transformed, making space for a fierce determination. Eliza felt a shift within her, a hardening of resolve. She wasn't just protecting her sisters. She was claiming their right to be together, to be free. This man, this silent, stoic cowboy, had shown her the possibility. The tentative trust solidified into something deeper, a quiet understanding forged in shared vulnerability and his unspoken promise. As they neared the small, remote settlement Cole seemed to be heading for, the air thickened with unspoken tension. He became even more watchful, his hand resting frequently on his rifle. Other riders began to appear on the horizon, figures that Cole seemed to recognize and avoid. Eliza sensed the impending threat, a feeling that coiled tight in her stomach. It wasn't just the elements or the wild now. It was the world of men, the world that had deemed them property. One evening, hunkered down in a small canyon, muffled voices drifted on the wind, harsh, demanding. Eliza recognized one of them from that first night. They were being pursued. The calm she had started to find shattered. But as she looked at Cole, silhouetted against the canyon wall, his rifle poised, she saw not fear, but a coiled readiness. He had brought them this far. He would see them through. The confrontation arrived with the dawn. 3 riders, grim-faced and armed, cornered them in the narrow canyon. Eliza pulled her sisters behind her, her heart pounding, but her gaze fixed on Cole, who stood his ground, his body a shield. The air crackled with tension. Words were exchanged, shouts and demands from the newcomers, low, measured replies from Cole. They demanded the girls, reminding him of the deal. Cole's voice, when he finally spoke beyond clipped responses, was quiet but carried like thunder through the canyon. "They are not for sale," he stated, his rifle never wavering. The standoff was short, brutal. A shot rang out, not from Cole but from one of the attackers, aiming at him. Cole moved with astonishing speed, returning fire, the shots echoing deafeningly. Eliza pushed the girls further behind a rock outcropping, covering their ears, but watching through a gap. Cole fought with a controlled ferocity, his movements efficient and deadly. He wasn't just defending himself, he was defending them. Eliza saw one man fall, then another. The third, startled and outmatched, wheeled his horse and fled, disappearing back the way they came. Silence descended, broken only by the ragged breathing of the horses and the distant cry of a hawk. Cole stood, smoke curling from his rifle barrel, his chest heaving slightly. He looked towards Eliza and her sisters, his expression unreadable in the dim light of dawn. Relief washed over Eliza, so potent it left her weak-kneed. They were safe. Because of him. She emerged from behind the rocks, pulling her sisters with her. Mary was crying softly, but Sarah was staring at Cole, her eyes wide with awe. Cole lowered his rifle, resting it against his leg. He looked at the fallen men for a moment, then back at them. "We move," he said, his voice rougher now, edged with the recent violence. There was no dwelling on what had happened, no seeking thanks. It was simply the next step. As they rode out of the canyon, leaving the grim scene behind. The sun finally crested the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. Eliza rode beside Cole now, the path wider here. Her sisters rode close behind her. The earlier fear had been replaced by something different, a quiet strength, a sense of agency she hadn't known she possessed. This man, who had been a part of their nightmare's beginning, had become their unexpected deliverance. He hadn't saved them with grand speeches or declarations, but with silent vigilance, quiet provisions, and a fierce, unyielding protection rooted in the simple, profound belief that they were not property. Later, as they rode towards a small, welcoming valley where a few cabins were visible, Cole spoke, his voice low. "There's folk there. Good folk. They owe me a kindness or two." He didn't explain further. Didn't need to. Eliza understood. He was securing their future, ensuring they had a place. She looked at him, at the weariness in his eyes, the lines on his face, and felt a depth of gratitude that words couldn't express. She didn't know what the future held, whether he would stay, whether this fragile new beginning would last. But looking at her sisters, their faces still marked by fear but now also by a dawning sense of safety, and looking at the man who had stood between them and the darkness, Eliza knew they had been fundamentally changed. Sold as chattel, they had found not just a protector, but a quiet affirmation of their worth, their right to exist, to be free, together. Resilience wasn't just surviving. It was finding light in the deepest shadows, finding an unexpected hand to hold when you thought you were utterly alone. And sometimes that hand belonged to the most unlikely person of all. The harsh landscape stretched before them, still challenging, but now, for the first time in a long time, Eliza looked towards it with a quiet, steadfast hope.